My dear father went to be with the good Lord just a couple weeks ago, really, a very short time ago. And I looked in his Bible today, and in Deuteronomy 16, verse 20, it says, "Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you." So when we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms founded on the supremacy of God, what has gone wrong when in our land, pastors like Art Pawlowski, do you remember this moment this last year? Art Pawlowski hunted down like an animal on a highway and arrested. And what was his crime? His crime was that he kept his church open and that he honored the ways of God. And he was imprisoned, put in jail, not treated particularly well as well. And this is what we have going on. We have person after person who has lost their job. We have thousands and thousands of people who now no longer have their jobs because they will not take a vaccine that has been mandated by our federal government and imposed and asked businesses to now impose this. When if you read our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you might think something like this, something like what you see right here could never happen in our nation, but it's happened. And I am very blessed to be able to introduce to you the Honourable Alfred Brian Peckford. He is a Canadian politician who served as the third Premier of Newfoundland between March 26, 1979 and March 22nd, 1989. Mr. Peckford was born and raised in Whitebourne. Before entering politics, he worked as a teacher, and then in 1972, in the general election, Peckford was elected as a member of the House of Assembly for Green Bay. He is now the last remaining architect of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This man was there when that piece of paper was crafted, the one we hope protects us from everything that is evil. And Honourable Mr. Peckford, thank you very much for being here. Thanks for taking your time to spend with us.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and to explain what is going on in our country right now.
How did it happen? Did you all gather in a big room, and did you begin to form what now embodies the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Did you hand pick certain words together in order to come up with this document?
Yes, and it wasn't done in just one room, one day. It was 17 months in the making. So that's what people have to understand. This wasn't a rush job. This was 17 months in the making. And what happened halfway through that was that the Prime Minister of Canada wasn't Mr. Chrétien, it was Mr. Trudeau. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the Prime Minister. And we got together to try to formulate bringing the Constitution home from London, and at the same time put in a Charter of Rights and Freedoms for every individual in Canada. When Canada was formed in 1867 through the BNA Act, we did not have a written Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So any Canadian going to court to try to protect their rights and freedoms from 1867 to 1981 had to do it just by unwritten British law or custom and convention that had grown up over the years. There was no written Charter of Rights and Freedoms for individuals. In 1960, Prime Minister Diefenbaker introduced the Bill of Rights, which was the first time that we saw highlighted in writing rights for individuals. Unfortunately, that Bill of Rights was only covered federal jurisdiction, not provincial jurisdiction. So it wasn't complete. And that's why in the early 80s, the First Ministers of Canada got together to try to formulate a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that would apply to every Canadian, from Bonavista to Iqaluit to Tofino to the Niagara Peninsula, taking in every single Canadian. And so that's what's magical and important about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It was the first written document that enshrined in the Constitution, not in a federal act, not in a provincial act, not in a municipal act, but in a national act, because that's what a constitution is. It's for the whole nation. All the other acts very often are only for federal or provincial jurisdiction. So that's really important for your viewers to understand. And so we were at this for 17 months, but halfway through, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau's father, left the table and said, "You are too difficult to deal with, and therefore I'm going to do this on my own." And so he tried to patriate, bring the Constitution home for good, and put a Charter of Rights in place on his own. And he passed a bill in the House of Commons, and he had the support of the majority of people in the House of Commons, and he had the support of the province of Ontario and the province of New Brunswick. And he passed that bill, and the other 8 provinces took him to court and said, "You can't do this. This is unconstitutional." And the court ruled in September 1981 that sure enough, what the Prime Minister was doing in 2 provinces was unconstitutional. You won't see this written up very much in the history books anymore. It's sort of hidden and ignored because the Prime Minister Trudeau is revered by a lot of Canadians, and he was supposed to be a constitutional expert. How could a constitutional expert get turned down by his own friends on the court for something that he did? Well, he did. He got turned down by his friends. At that time, the judges were friends of the law first and friends of the Prime Minister or the system second. We have to wonder today whether that's still true. There's a lot of people in Canada who've already said very, very strongly and disappointingly that is our justice system the same as it was in 1981? So he was turned down. What did the court say? They said, what you're trying to do is unconstitutional because the things that you're doing affects all of Canada, all the provinces, not just the federal government. And therefore, because we're in a federal state and not a unitary state, there's a sharing of powers. The provinces have certain powers, federal government has certain powers. So when a prime minister comes out and unilaterally tries to do something, he's affecting powers that belong to the provinces. That's why he was turned down. So the court said, you cannot do it. It's unconstitutional. In order for you to be able to do this, you have to have a majority of provinces. A majority of provinces. They didn't say how many, but they said a majority. So he had to come back to the table again and deal with us who had taken him to court, because he wasn't an emperor. He wasn't a king. He couldn't do whatever he liked. Even under the BNA Act, he had to share his decision-making with the provinces, and the majority had to agree. Otherwise, he had no Charter of Rights or no patriation. So it's not Prime Minister Trudeau's Bill of Rights, Charter of Rights. When you see somebody going around with a parchment paper and you see on it, and it's up in the schools and it's up in some public buildings, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it's signed by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, that's unconstitutional. The court ruled in 81 that it wasn't his Charter of Rights, it had to be our Charter of Rights. And therefore, unless all of the 9 provinces who agreed, there you go. Thank you for putting it up on the screen. There you go. Whose name is on it? Pierre Elliott Trudeau. That's unconstitutional. You have to have the names of everybody who agreed to that Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1981, of which there were 9 provinces. The only province that didn't agree with it was Quebec. And so therefore, unless all of the names are on there, that one should be taken off. That should be scratched away. It's not Pierre Elliott Trudeau's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In any case, we did get a Charter of Rights and Freedoms because he came back to the table, and on November the 5th, as a result of a proposal, by the way, that I presented, that the Newfoundland delegation presented, we broke the impasse. There was 3 final days of the talks after 17 months, November 3rd, 4th, and 5th of 1981. No deal on the 3rd, no deal on the 4th. But overnight on the 4th, I met with a bunch of premiers with a new proposal, which I thought was a good compromise. They agreed with me, made some changes, and then the next day we presented that, after 9 provinces agreed, to the Prime Minister in an open, a meeting of all the First Ministers. And with some more smaller changes, we got the agreement late in the afternoon of the 5th of November, 1981. In other words, this year is the 40th anniversary of the Charter. In the United States, by the way, you'd be pleased, won't be pleased to hear, Their Charter of Rights, or their Bill of Rights, came in 1791, a written Bill of Rights. We didn't get ours until 1981. So it's only 40 years old. And here we are now, only 40 years in, and we see the governments of Canada abusing this document. They're violating the rights under Section 2, which is freedom of conscience, religion, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. They're violating Section 6, which talks about mobility. We can travel anywhere in the country and we can leave the country. And they're violating Section 6, which talks about your right to pursue a livelihood. And look at all the jobs that have been taken away. And it says in that, pursue a livelihood. You have the right as an individual of this country to pursue a livelihood. It didn't say in certain circumstances. It didn't put any conditions on it. And then 7 talks about the right to life, liberty, and your security of person. This is the life, liberty, and the security of the person. In other words, your person cannot be violated without your consent. You can't be coerced in it. You can't be threatened with a job, right? This is what's happening in our country. And the last one, the 4th section, Section 15, which applies, is equality before the law. Well, I don't have equality before the law right now because there's some places I'm not allowed to go, whereas other people are allowed to go in them. So how is that equality before the law? It's not. It's been violated. Now, to come to the point which everybody who's listening to this today are going to say, yes, Brian, yes, Mr. Peckford, you're right. All of these freedoms or rights are there, and thank you for making sure they're in the Constitution. However, the governments are saying that they can override all of these rights because of Section 1. And my answer to that is an emphatic no. They cannot use Section 1. I remember very well when Section 1 was put in, because it's very hard to change the Constitution. Remember, it was over 100 years before 1981, right? 1867 was when the first BNA Act was put in, which formed Canada. When was the next time that significant change happened to the Constitution? 1981. So it's over 100 years. It's very hard to change the Constitution everywhere in any democracy, because you want something that's going to last, something that's going to be the rule of law, right? And something that's going to bring stability to your nation. So Section 1 was meant to apply to a very, very dire situation in the country, like a war, like insurrection, or some other dire threat to the existence of the state. That's what that was meant to apply to, not to a virus where you have 99% recovery, not to a virus where there's 0.08 fatality. That's not a threat to the state. That's not a war. That's not an insurrection. And yet they're trying to squeeze themselves into Section 1 to therefore say they're justified in doing what they're doing. Well, they're not. And as the last person who was there, first minister who was there, there are other people there besides the first ministers, but the last first minister who was there is me. All of the rest have passed away. So I'm left to carry this cudgel now, and I accept carrying this cudgel as the last one left. I want to defend the people who were at that meeting. I want to defend those other 7 premiers who stood tall until we brought Mr. Trudeau back to the table and negotiated those things. I have an obligation to discharge my responsibility for them as well as for myself. And I can say unequivocally, this section was not meant to apply in this kind of circumstances. Now, after saying that, just for argument's sake, let's say it applies. Just for argument's sake, what do they have to do to be able to use Section 1 if it did apply? 4 tests. They have to pass 4 tests. 1, they have to demonstrably justify what they're doing. Not just justify, demonstrably justify. That's a pretty tough piece of business, to demonstrably justify. What does that mean? Well, they got to justify what they're doing. Well, have they done a cost-benefit analysis to see whether the cure is not worse than the disease? There's a professor at Simon Fraser University who's done a big report that none of the mainstream media will carry. Perhaps you can have him on your program, Douglas Allen, if you already haven't.
We've just had him.
There you go. Good for you. I'm so glad you did. Good for you. Good for you. And he showed Nobody's challenged his report. They don't even carry it. But he showed that the cure was worse than the disease. In other words, they have not demonstrably justified doing what they're doing. Or a report, right? Some kind of a report, some kind of study where they hear both sides of the issue. They haven't done that. Okay. They've got to do it by law. And my interpretation of that, and I remember that, well, that was a new law, not trying to use an existing law, because they're the ones who say it's a new circumstance. It's a completely unusual circumstance. Well, if it's unusual as they're saying it is, then we need a new law, not trying to hide under an existing law to do what they're doing. They haven't done that, right? Then it has to be done within reasonable limits. Well, because they haven't got a study done or anything like that, there's no reasonable limits to apply to anything. It's all in hot air, right? It's all and there's nothing to put reasonable limits around. And then the final one, if Section 1 did apply, was all of this has to be done within the context of a free and democratic society. Now, a free and democratic society means to me that the parliament should be open and should be debating this. There should be parliamentary bringing witnesses in from all sides of the issue to debate it with the committees. And the committees should be public so that the public can see what's going on and get a sense of where the truth really lies. And then the parliamentary committee could make a report to the full parliament, decide what the government should do about the circumstance, right? So that's what should have been done. So even if Section 1 applied, they have failed their exams. They had to go back to school and learn a little bit more because they didn't pass the 4 tests that are in Section 1. But my argument is Section 1 doesn't even apply because it's not a war, it's not an insurrection, it's not a threat to the state. And that's the only circumstances under which Section 1 applied. I remember.
And it's my understanding that you've even gone so far as to write to the premiers, attempt to have a conversation with them, some understanding of what they're doing, and let them know that they should be dealing with this in a different way.
I wrote all the premiers because one morning I woke up and I remembered that there was a way to, one of the criticisms when I have all these public meetings and all these interviews like this one, that people are really frustrated because the normal court process will take 3 to 4 years to get through all of the various stages of the litigation process in the province and then on to the Supreme Court of Canada. And I understand that. That's completely, especially in this circumstance where people are losing their jobs. People are dying because they never got the surgeries that were scheduled. Right? This is madness. This is insanity. And so I don't know why I never thought about it before, but there is a procedure whereby the premiers can take any measure that they've passed directly to their appeal court and ask that appeal court to give them a constitutional decision on it, okay? Or the prime minister can do it too. So I wrote them all. Of course, guess what? The only replies I got back were electronic replies, and nobody has moved to do it. So that would shorten the time by half or more. In other words, from 3.5 to 4 years to about 1.5 to 2 years. And I suspect it would even be less than that. It might be only a year, because if a government makes that kind of a referral directly to their highest court, I think they're going to put the other issues on the back burner and deal with this one first. They know the seriousness of this situation and would hear it right away. So give that 6 months in the provincial court, right? Appeal court. Then it would get automatically appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. And I think the Supreme Court of Canada would do the same thing. They would hear it. So give that 6 months. So there's a year. Let's just put another 6 months on for good measure. So 1.5 years, you could have a decision on whether what they're doing is constitutional or not. Now, it's going to take 3.5 or 4 years. And the governments are delaying. There's one court in class action suit in Vancouver right now, which is in court. And what is the government doing? They're delaying providing the information that's being asked for by the people who bought that suit into the court. They're delaying giving the information, delaying, making it longer and longer. In Alberta, there's a case ongoing in Alberta with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, where they're doing the same thing. So Canadians are getting frustrated when they see people lose jobs, when they see loved ones lose their lives, when they see all these injuries. Right now, I just did a piece on my blog where I indicated that the VAERS system in the United States now is showing about 20,000 dead This is a voluntary system, okay? 20,000 dead and almost 1 million injured, okay? 20,000 dead, almost 1 million injured, okay? And that's in a population over 300 million. Well, and then the VAERS system itself says we're only capturing 1 to 10% of the total. So let's say it's 10%. Well, then Canada is 1/10 the size of America. So, okay. So America, therefore, 20 times 10 would be 200,000. Okay. 1/10 of that. We got about 20,000 dead in Canada as a result of these vaccines. And we got about 100,000 injured. And in Europe, we got the same kind of situations, 1.3 million in Western Europe that have been injured, but they don't identify deaths versus injury. So it's 1.3 million injured in Europe by their own figures. Both of these agencies, the VAERS agency and the UDRA Vigilance Agency in Europe, are government agencies. And they're reporting, and it's all voluntary. So a study was done out of Harvard which showed that this system, VAERS system in the United States, is only capturing 1 to 10%. So I'm not making this up. This is as a result of a study out of Harvard University.
You're absolutely
which showed
right.
that this system is about 1 to 10% valid,
right.
because a lot of people don't report it, right?
And
They
I'll
think it's a
also
heart
say,
attack.
you've been only saying VAERS. I'll also say it's Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And the reason that I have to say that, sir, is because I've been in the hospital here in Surrey Memorial and other places, and doctors don't even know what a VAERS report is. Doctors in our nation have no idea. They don't even know that there have been deaths necessarily. They are so uninformed that that's part of the problem.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It's unbelievable what's happening in our country and how much is now being suppressed. Let me just give you another example of suppression. Is the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, which is one of the larger organizations in Canada now, which has Dr. Bridle and other very prominent, respected, scholarly people in their organization or on their board. Well, that organization last week, a week before, was given a donation, and that donation was with a condition on it that you put all of this data, independent, scientific, peer-reviewed data, in a national newspaper. So they went to the National Post to put an ad in their paper showing these studies. It was turned down. National Post wouldn't carry it, even though they were willing to pay. So that'll give you an idea the level of suppression that's happening in this country. And a lot of people are ignoring it, closing their ears to what you and I are saying, and somehow going with the narrative, which is completely false. Every premier is guilty because they're going along and putting in, under their own provincial laws, measures that are also unconstitutional. It's not just the Prime Minister. It's all of the First Ministers and the 3 territorial leaders. So we're talking about 14 governments, 3 territories, 10 provinces, and the federal government, all initiating actions which are unconstitutional and violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that I helped write.
Is this the final version that you all wanted, what we got?
Yeah, that's what we got. That's what we negotiated. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Well, everybody had to compromise. We all didn't get what we wanted, but what we got there is the final thing that was passed and is now the Constitution of Canada, part of the Constitution of Canada. Have you been able to speak in front of one judge yet? Have you been, in my opinion, you should have been in every court. You should have been the authority at this time, at this grave hour. It should be you that is dealing with the courts and called to court, subpoenaed. Yes, exactly. Well, there are 3 groups now whose names I can't mention, of course, because we're still dealing with it, who've contacted me and said, are you prepared to do an affidavit? And I said, yes, I am. And they said, well, this might lead to you appearing physically in court. And I said, I can't wait for the day when I will appear in court and look a judge straight in the eye and say to them, what we have here from the governments of Canada is unconstitutional. If they start to try to use Section 1, which they're doing in this argument before you, Your Honor, I have to tell you that the intent of Section 1 had nothing to do with what we're involved in right now. It had to do with war and insurrection and a threat to the state. This particular virus and this particular condition does not apply to Section 1. Section 1 does not cover this, and therefore what they're doing is unconstitutional. And like I said to you, I went on to say, and even if by some weird thinking, which is false, that it did apply, they haven't passed the 4 tests that are in Section 1 anyway. So if I could get before a judge, that's what I would say.
Well, okay, funny story, sir. Personally speaking, I have received 5 tickets across the country. I was at an outdoor rally and I got 3 tickets in Saskatchewan. I'm outdoors and it's for not social distancing. I think they probably saw me hugging someone outdoors. And so this very morning, I had a wonderful judge. He was very polite, very kind. I'm praying he's one of the good ones, but who knows these days. But Justice from Saskatchewan called me early this morning because they're in court. I am to be notified of when my court date will be for these. And he said to me that there are challenges to the Constitution that are going on. And he would like to hear those because they'll be represented by a lawyer, and because I'm representing myself, because I intend to use your video today, sir. If I can't get you in court, I'm going to be showing him what the founding fathers meant of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'll be sharing that with him.
Gosh.
Yes.
You made my day.
Yeah. So don't you worry. You're getting into court one way or another.
You made my day. You made my day.
You're the best defense I have, sir. You're the best defense. You were there when this was written. This was not put in place so that you could use the notwithstanding or whatever you call it clause to implement these tyrannies.
Go to my blog after we're finished. Yeah. And the blog, I put quite a few articles here every day. So this is the one by Dr. Alexander. Who used to work at the McMaster University, and he lists 5 or 6 studies there which demonstrate that there's no difference between the spreading from an unvaccinated or a vaccinated. In other words, what you just said has been validated by the studies. Yes, you got it up on the screen. Great. No scientific basis to segregate unvaccinated from vaccinated. And if your readers or your listeners would go to my blog and read that, all the studies are given there. And this guy, Alexander, if you look down at his bio,
we just had him on.
Blow your mind.
I know.
And these are all independent studies.
Exactly.
So these people don't, the governments of Canada are standing on a hill of sand. We got what we got. We've got to defend it. We know, I'm still alive. We know what we meant by Section 1. And any reasonable person would know, given that it's in a council. It's not like it's in an act that you can change, in Parliament every year, right? You could change the act in Parliament every time the Parliament is open, and the Parliament has got to be open every year. Well, that's not true of a constitution. That's why it has to be more general in nature, and then find good judges who are going to interpret it properly. But what's happening in our country? The other thing that's happening in our country is that judges are coming up through law schools where they're learning that this new theory of how you interpret law. And the theory is, and Beverly McLaughlin, by the way, was one of the ones who really advanced this, unfortunately, when she was Chief Justice. And it's called, for your viewers, the living tree doctrine, which says you can take the law and then you can grow it without changing it, without going back to the elected and getting it changed. I'm opposed to that. If you want to change the Constitution, you don't do it through the judges. You do it through your democracy. You do it through your elected representatives. I
will tell you that a judge that I will have to appear before is going to get pretty much this full interview, and I will cut it down to the most important parts he needs to know, but I don't think we have to cut much out. This is history right now. You are the history bearer for our nation. And I am so grateful that you are standing.
And that's why I'm speaking out. I'm hoping that this goes up to the higher courts and that we got more sense at the higher courts. We may not.
We can only
I'm not
pray.
saying it's a slam dunk or even a 90% chance. Back in 81, I think it was like a 70 or 80% chance. I suspect today it's only about a 50 or 60% chance. The Charter is the supreme law of Canada. Section 52 of the Constitution Act 1982, where the Charter is located. You go to Section 52 of the Constitution Act, 1982, and you will find the supreme law of Canada is the Constitution. It's over and above every other law in Canada. So that's where we got to put our efforts.
I appreciate that. When we have a prime minister who's saying things like this, let me just show you this clip and get your feedback.
By the end of October, everyone 12 or older on a plane or train within Canada should be fully vaccinated. But by the end of November, if you're 12 or older and want to fly or take the train, you'll have to be fully vaccinated, as will staff. Testing will no longer be an option before boarding. Done the right thing and gotten vaccinated, you deserve the freedom to be safe from COVID-19, to have your kids safe from COVID, to get back to the things you love. And if you haven't gotten your shots yet but want to travel this winter, let's be clear. There will only be a few extremely narrow exceptions, like a valid medical condition. For the vast majority of people, the rules are very simple. To travel, you've got to be vaccinated. These travel measures, along with mandatory vaccination for federal employees, are some of the strongest in the world. Because when it comes to keeping you and your family safe, when it comes to avoiding lockdowns for everyone, this is no time for half measures. Already, we're delivering on the first of our vaccine commitments, and in the weeks to come, we'll get the job done on a vaccine passport for international travel. We'll be there to foot the bill for provinces and territories that roll out proof of vaccination programs, and we'll introduce legislation to make it a criminal offense to threaten or harass healthcare workers.
Okay, so we don't want to threaten
That is completely unconstitutional and violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The medical research that he should know, that Dr. Tam should know, and everybody in the federal government, as Professor Alexander said in the piece that I got on my blog, shows that the people who are vaccinated have just as heavy a viral load as those who are unvaccinated. So this business of separating and segregating people has no basis in science, no scientific basis to segregate the unvaccinated from the vaccinated. That is the science. That is the real science. And therefore, he is blatantly violating the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which his father, with 9 other premiers, signed back in '81. And this is a travesty. This is a travesty of justice. For this man to sit down there and order Canadians not to be able to travel based upon a medical advice
Private
which
medical
is completely
information.
erroneous and completely unscientific. You know, it's awful. It's terrible. And then to think that the majority of Canadians go along with this trash, go along with this unscientific information, is even worse. I mean, what's happened to us?
That's the biggest
We've
problem.
lost our minds.
Exactly.
We've lost our common sense.
All kinds of people, professors losing their jobs, nurses, doctors across our nation, the good people falling because of the tyranny that is happening.
So this is the kind of stuff that's got to get in court. We've got to get this stuff in court and force a judge to look at the fact that there were alternatives to what the government is doing, and they failed to adopt alternatives.
You know what? You've been very generous with your time. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. You've helped me a lot. I hope I win my case in court because of your testimony today. And I appreciate what you're doing for the nation, sir.
Thank you very much. And I think you'll shake up that judge if you get a chance to play this.
I sure will.
Or if you don't get a chance to play it, if you get a chance to transcribe it and submit it into the court, make sure it gets in there one way or another.
I'm going to send them the video and the transcription, and we're going to get it played in court because that's how we got to do this. Yep. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. And
you bet.
Hopefully we'll have a chance to meet again.
Absolutely. Thank you for your service to Canada. God bless. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
You know, it's not easy to deliver the truth of what our sick world is doing, but for some of us, we feel that we have no choice. Because if we are silent about these abominable things, then we are letting evil go unchecked, and we cannot do that. For those of you wonderful people who are writing me and are sharing your encouragement, I am deeply grateful. Thank you for all the letters that you've been sending. Thank you for the donations and the support. I found out that in order to speak the truth, you have to become very, very strong. If you would go to my website at www.laura-lynn.tv, you'll find all of the ways that you can contact me. Remember, my friends, all is well. All is well. Thanks for joining me.